So a couple of days ago, Paul Hudson wrote this tweet that can you fit a neat Swift or a SwiftUI tip in a tweet? If so, reply below. So these tips are basically Swift and SwiftUI, and you can see there are a lot of tips. This goes on for like maybe 74 or 75 comments, and all of them are really small tips that can increase your productivity for Swift or SwiftUI. So what I'm doing in this video is going through these tips for SwiftUI. Not all of them because there are a lot, and probably I have to do another part for this. But I'm going through all of these tips and basically creating a video for the tips that are discussed in the tweet. The link to the tweet will be in the YouTube description if you want to visit it. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so let's go ahead and start with our first tip, and this tip is from me. Whenever we are working with SwiftUI application and we want to use a navigation view, so we simply use a navigation view and wrap everything surrounding it, right? So this creates a navigation view. And now we can go ahead and add a title and all that stuff using the navigation title. We can go ahead and say welcome or whatever we want to say. So this is perfectly fine, but there is a much easier way you can accomplish this, because what's going to happen is that sometimes your code over here in your body becomes too large and it becomes a little bit of a hassle to wrap it in the navigation view. Or you want to perform some customization on the navigation view or something else that you want to do for each view inside the navigation view. So how can we control it a little bit more better? So one of the ways that we can do that is by providing an extension and creating a separate modifier. So we're going to go ahead and create something, embed in navigation view. That's a modifier extension function that we're creating. It's going to return some sort of a view, and we can go ahead and return navigation view, wrapping whoever called embed in navigation view. So how do we use it? So let's go ahead and remove this part. Okay, so now we are without the navigation view since I just removed the navigation view. So there is no longer a navigation view. And if I want to add a navigation view, I can simply go ahead and say embed in navigation view, which creates a navigation view. And I can also go ahead and say over here, welcome, or whatever the title is. So this becomes a little bit more easier to maintain because now it's a modifier instead of a view that is surrounding other views. All right. So embed in navigation view, that is the first tip for SwiftUI. All right, so here's my second tip for SwiftUI. And in this tip, I'm going to show you that how you can center a view horizontally. So let's first go ahead and see what kind of a problem that we're facing. If I go ahead and wrap this with a vertical stack, let's go ahead and refresh our view on the right-hand side. Okay, so that looks all fine, right? Now I'm going to go ahead and add a button. There we go. Now everything is already centered, so there's nothing that we want to do to center it, right? Now what happens if I am displaying some sort of a description also? This app says, this app is called Hello World, and this is a simple app. Okay, so everything is fine, but now it kind of looks weird that the text is basically centered. So I can go to my VStack and I can put the alignment to be leading so that it is left to right. All right, and I can remove the padding from the first one. So it looks like this. So everything is okay, but now what I wanted to do is the Hello World button, let's call it something else, let's call it save. The save button, I want it to be in the center, not aligned on the left-hand side. So what we can do is create a modifier to align the button or any other view in the center much easily. So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. I'm going to again write extension view. Going to create a modifier, center horizontally, and this is going to return some sort of a view. So this particular modifier can be called on any view, and how we're going to center it is we're going to use a edge stack, and we're just going to put spacers. So both of these spacers are pushing the self, which is any view that you are calling center horizontally, to the middle. And now I can go ahead and easily say center horizontally, and you will see that the save button now is horizontal. All right. So this is another tip if you want to create a modifier to center things horizontally. Another one of my tip is regarding receiving or registering to receive notifications using SwiftUI and Combine. So let's say that we wanted to receive notification for when the application will enter the foreground. So one of the easy ways that we can do that is we can perform on receive. And in the on receive, we can specify which publisher are we trying to hook up to. So notification center dot default dot publisher, and now we can say that what kind of a publisher that we are looking for, right? I mean, there are many different publishers available, so we are looking for a special publisher, and in this case we are looking for UI application. Basically for the foreground event, will enter foreground notification. And this is going to get us a notification, and this part is going to get fired. So this is basically will enter foreground notification fired. Now, this is where you can go ahead and do whatever you want. So whenever the application enters the foreground, it is going to call this notification. So if I go ahead and run the app right now, when it enters the foreground, which it will once it is running, we will see that this particular message, will enter foreground notification, gets fired. So let's go ahead and make sure that the app is actually running. It's still trying to run. And you will see that the notification for will enter foreground notification is fired, and it will enter that. So right now, let's go ahead and first see that. There we go. So let's go back, and there we go. All right. So we saw that the notification is getting fired as soon as we are entering the foreground. This tip comes from Twitter handle NSSanta, and this tip basically is about modifiers. Do not use if conditions to add certain modifiers in your views, and this was also discussed a lot in WWDC videos. So let me go ahead and show you what this actually means. So let's say that we have a state, all right, and we have a property called isActive, which is initially false. Let's go ahead and add a vstack. We will also add a button, and we can go ahead and say over here submit or make it active or something. We can say submit, and whenever a person says submit, we will go ahead and toggle this property from true to false and false to true. Based on that condition, based on the isActive property, we are going to render a text view, and we're going to render the same thing, hello world, but we're going to change the background color to something else over here. So if it is active, then we can go ahead and say it is green. Else, if it is not active, then maybe we can say a different color or something. So basically the only thing that we're changing is applying new modifiers or a different modifier based on the condition is active or not. Now if I go ahead and run this, it works perfectly fine, but it creates kind of like more complexity and it also not only creates complexity, but also it's not really good for performance if you're doing this a lot into your SwiftUI views. And this has been discussed, as I mentioned earlier, in SwiftUI videos at WWDC, that don't try to use this. If you have to do this, then maybe there is a better approach. And the better approach is not to use if-else conditions, but perform conditions based on the modifier itself. So basically we can go over here, and if you want to put a modifier, we can now go ahead and say if it is active, then go ahead and do green, or else you will go ahead and do red. So this is much better than our last approach without using the if and else. So it's not going to create different branches, it's just going to do inline validation of the is active and perform return the green or the red color. So this is a tip coming from NS Santa, and this is very important that you, whenever you're adding modifiers, you are adding it in this particular way. Here is another SwiftUI tip for making your tappable regions a little bit bigger. So let's say that we have a list over here, and we are displaying 10 items in the list. It doesn't really matter what kind of items we are displaying. Let's just say that we're displaying item number with the index. Okay, so we have these items. Now I want to go ahead and be able to tap on each item, and whenever we tap on each item, I want to go ahead and print out the index. If I go ahead and run the application right now and tap on the item, I can see that it was saying the index, which is fine. If I go ahead and press item 3, I can see the index, which is item 3. But what about if I tap on this empty space? If I tap on this empty space, nothing really happens. It only happens when I press or tap on the actual label, the text. What I want is to cover this area also. So how can I do that? Well, if I go ahead and click on the text right now, you can see the blue lines over here indicating that the text is just this small. One thing that we can do is put our text inside the edge stack. But just by putting your text inside the edge stack is not really going to make it horizontally larger, because if I click on the edge stack, you can still see that it is confined to the size of the text. We can go ahead and add a spacer. And now when I press on edge stack, you can see that it is covering the whole space. So this is good indication that I should be able to go ahead and add the on tap gesture. Now if I go ahead and run this, I can tap on the actual item, but still I cannot tap on this empty space. In order to do that, we'll have to do one more thing. We have to provide a content shape to be a rectangle. So basically we're saying that this whole area can be tapped now. And now if I go ahead and run it, I can tap on the text itself, but I can also tap on the empty spaces. So this is another SwiftUI tip that you can use the content shape to provide a rectangle or a circle or any other shape, and that shape will become tappable, much bigger region. In iOS 15, there is a new way to dismiss your modal sheets. So if I go ahead and run this application right now, you will see that when I press on Show Sheet, it displays me the Add view, which is demonstrated right there. The Add view has a button, which is called Dismiss. But if I click on the Dismiss button, it doesn't really do anything. Now, if we were using before iOS 15 or even iOS 15, there is a way to dismiss it by using the presentation mode. We can get access to the presentation mode. And then when you want to dismiss, you can simply call presentation mode.wrapValue.dismiss. Let's go ahead and run this and see if it dismisses or not. Okay, so it does work, but in iOS 15, you don't really have to access presentation mode. It's simplified as dismiss. So we can simply change everything to dismiss and call the dismiss function. Much nicer and much simpler. The effect is same. It will dismiss your sheet. So let's go ahead and run it again to make sure that it is producing the same exact output. And you can see it is. So a new modifier, you can use dismiss with the key path value of dismiss. Now, one of the really cool features that were added to SwiftUI is in the form of debugging. Right now, if we go ahead and run this application, do you think that the body will be rendered again when I click on the toggle button? Now, in order to test that, we can go ahead and add this new feature, which is self.print changes. And what it will do is every time the body is re-rendered, it is going to display us in the output window. So let me go ahead and run the app. And what we're going to do is click on this toggle button. And one thing you are noticing is if I press on the toggle button, the view, which is called the content view, is not rendered. Now this might be strange because in the button click, we are actually changing the isActive property or toggling it between false and true to false. But if we are doing that, why it is not re-rendering the view? The reason it's not re-rendering the view is that there is no need to re-render the view because you never use isActive property to modify the view. So if I go ahead and add a text property and I would check is active, if it's true, then I would say active. If it is not true, then I would say not active. So now we are actually using the isActive property on a condition, and based on the condition, we are changing the view. So now the view will be re-rendered again. So if I go ahead and run the application and press on the toggle button, now you can see that it is saying that the toggle is active with change. So it's very good for debugging. It will tell you which state is changing and if the body or the view is re-rendered or not. So this is a really good tip for when you are programming SwiftUI. In SwiftUI, you can use scene phase to find out when your app becomes active or inactive. So let's go ahead and see how that works. We are going to use the environment value. And the good thing about this is that these values are already passed as system-wide settings, so you can access them anywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and access something called scene phase, and we are going to simply call it SC. And now on the window group itself, we can perform or listen for those changes on the scene phase. We are going to get a particular value like a phase, and this phase is something that we can switch over. And you can see that different cases over here will be active when the application becomes active. So we can simply go ahead and say active. When the application becomes inactive, so in that case we can say inactive. When the application becomes background, so we can say that this is in background. All right. And for the default case, we can simply go ahead and say nothing at all. Now, if I go ahead and run the application, you can see that it automatically fired active. If I go and send the application in the background, it will be inactive and then it will be in the background. And finally, when I go and launch the application, it will be inactive, but then it will become active. So you can see that it's very easy to listen to these changes in your SwiftUI application. Now, sometimes in SwiftUI, you want to find out when the actual state value changed. We know that whenever the state value changes and you are using that value to modify the view will be re-rendered. But sometimes we may need to perform some other operation. And for that purpose, you can use the onChange modifier. The onChange modifier can be attached to any view you want. So let's go ahead and attach it to our VStack. The onChange modifier is going to ask you that, hey, which state value are you trying to look for? Or which should I look for changes? So is active. And now we can go ahead and get the new value, whether it will be true or false. And this code is going to get fired whenever the isActive state is actually changing. So if I go ahead and run the application right now, and I toggle, you can see that the state value is changing, false, true, and this is indicating that the onChange modifier is getting fired. So this is a really interesting modifier in SwiftUI that you can use if you want to know when the state changed, and probably you want to take any action when the state changes.